The decision to euthanize a pet is impossibly difficult, but the reason that I hear from owners is always the same. They don't want their pet to suffer. This decision is one last gift, the gift of comfort, the gift of peace. Stories are shared, tears are shed, sentiments of thanks, comfort, and love are whispered. We explain that we're going to give a sedative, and their pet will fall asleep surrounded by the love of their family. And when they're ready, we'll give that last drug, and their heart will stop within moments. Their death is swift, painless, and peaceful. I've worked in veterinary medicine for 6 years and have assisted in countless procedures like this one. Before that, I worked in nursing homes and hospice facilities that housed and cared for grandparents, parents, brothers, sisters, neighbors, and friends. And while it is a common and morally justified practice in veterinary medicine, euthanasia remains a taboo in human medical practice. Death with dignity laws in the U.S. are restrictive and need to be revised. We're going to talk about these restrictions, how legislation can be improved, common concerns, and what you can do to advocate for yourself and for others. Death and dying is an ever-evolving cultural experience, and the problem in our culture today is this: medical aid in dying is not sufficiently accessible. According to deathwithdignity.org, accessed on August 20th, there are only 9 states with aid in dying legislation. The U.S. Census Bureau's 2019 report shows that within these states is over 70 million people that have access to these laws, which is roughly 18% of the country. Of those 70 million, statistically only about 25.5 million are eligible for aid in dying, which is roughly 7% of U.S. citizens. All aid in dying legislation in the United States is based on the Oregon Death with Dignity Act. Under this act, a terminally ill adult with 6 months or less to live can apply to obtain lethal medication to end their life, according to the Oregon State Revised Statute on Oregon.gov, accessed August 20th. This medication must be self-administered without the help of another person, and patients will not be considered if they have dementia, depression, or psychiatric conditions. These restrictions alienate people that deserve equal access to a compassionate and dignified death. The first restriction is that a patient must self-administer the medication, but this excludes people with limited mobility, such as those that suffer paralysis or degenerative illnesses like ALS. The second restriction prohibits those diagnosed with dementia. Dementia is becoming more common every year. According to the World Health Organization, there are over 10 million new diagnoses annually, and those numbers are expected to more than double by 2060, according to a 2018 press release by the CDC. The third restriction prevents the consideration of those diagnosed with depression or other psychiatric conditions. According to an April 2020 CDC data brief, depression affects over 264 million people around the world, and suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, showing a 35% increase from 1999 to 2018. Other common psychiatric conditions also affect nearly 27 million people in the United States. But I'm young and healthy. Why do I need to concern myself with death and dying laws? This discussion is not just for the disabled, the sick, and the elderly. With modern medicine, death has become something that can be pushed back and delayed. It's the last enemy, an unwelcome and always unexpected stranger lurking in the shadows. But the fact remains, no matter how uncomfortable, that one day death will come to visit each and every one of us. So what do? Here's the solution. We expand eligibility and allow doctors to perform euthanasia in appropriate situations. Euthanasia will remain a punishable offense, but there is an exemption for doctors that perform it under qualifying circumstances. In order to perform euthanasia, the physician must be convinced that the request is voluntary and well considered, that the patient's suffering is unbearable with no prospect of improvement, and that there is no other reasonable solution for the patient's situation. Eligibility will be based on the experience of the individual, not their diagnosis. How do we know this will work? The policy I've described is the same policy that has been in practice since 2002 in the Netherlands. As Antina de Jong and Gert van Dijk talked about in their article, Euthanasia in the Netherlands, Balancing Autonomy and Compassion, published in the 2017 World Medical Journal. This legislation has been effective in the Netherlands and is frequently reviewed to ensure public safety. Some may have objections to the changes that I am proposing. One may be the concern for abusive legislation, performing euthanasia too liberally, or people being coerced. Abuse will be prevented by the mandatory reporting of each euthanasia case, allowing it to be investigated and judged. Also, though eligibility is more inclusive, a request for aid in dying is not a guarantee of approval. Another concern is the violation of do no harm. Often mistaken for being a part of the Hippocratic Oath, this is actually a separate principle that refers to the environmental impact of medical practice, as discussed in Sabrina Marino's 2017 article, The Prohibition of Euthanasia and Medical Oaths of Hippocratic Stemma, published in Acta Bioethica. Nevertheless, it's worth consideration. We have to ask ourselves, what is more harmful? Denying aid to a person that has made their own independent decision, forcing them to continue to suffer? Or do we respect their autonomy and offer a compassionate option? Take a moment and envision the impact this change will have. Let's say we choose to do nothing. Without voter support, even current U.S. death with dignity laws may disappear entirely, robbing people of their right to independent choice. Without making these policies more inclusive, millions of people will continue to face unnecessary hardship and trauma. Suicide rates will continue to climb, leaving loved ones to pick up the pieces of an unexpected and often gruesome exit. But what if we choose to act? What if we choose compassion and dignity? Imagine the relief of a cancer patient, knowing that they have the power to choose when the time is right for them to leave this life, surrounded by their loved ones and family members. Imagine the reassurance for the grandmother diagnosed with Alzheimer's that knows that she doesn't have to suffer through not only forgetting who her friends and family are, but who she is. Imagine the closure for families that will not need to watch a person that they love suffer through a degenerative illness or continue to suffer through a losing battle within themselves. Imagine comfort. Imagine peace. Progress is not made in silence. I implore you to reach out to your state representatives to voice your support for advances in death and dying legislation. Call, write letters, send emails, blow up Twitter, petition, do the groundwork, not only for yourself, but for your community. Expanding eligibility will ensure that the needs and interests of all Americans are considered and respected. Death affects us all, and it is within our power to make a difference for those that have to meet that last stranger before we do. We have the power to bestow compassion. We have the power to bestow kindness. We have the power to do no harm.